Welcome, everyone, to the Constellation call. We're now entering our third year of providing a forum for intelligent discussion of constellation work and coaching and related topics. So we have a guest speaker tonight, and we're really happy to welcome Elmar Dornberger. Elmar has been involved with systemic and constellation work for quite some time as these things are measured. He founded Hemisphere Consulting in 2001. He works out of Boulder. Does counseling, coaching, and constellations actually for about 12 years now. He trains as well. He works with individuals, groups, and organizations. He has a really diverse background, MA Transpersonal Psychology, MA Visual Communication, BA Mechanical Engineering, NLP with actual instruction from one of the founders, Richard Bandler, and a whole lot of systemic training with a lot of really well-known people. And so Elmar is going to lead a discussion tonight on what he calls liminal constellations. There's an article, he has an article about this in the current issue of the Knowing Field. And so we're really happy to have you here. And at this point, I will give the baton over to you, Elmar.
Thanks, Michael, for the introduction, and thank you for having me on this call. I really feel honored to be on this call because this, so far, when I have been listening into it, it has really high caliber and really good conversations on this call. So thank you for having me on this call. So I would like to share a little bit how I came to this work. And I don't know how many of you have had the chance to read the article. My assumption is some have and maybe some have not. So I will walk you kind of through some questions that I've raised over the last 3 years. And interesting enough, I was kind of working in a vacuum, so to speak. I wasn't really talking to other facilitators as I was having these questions. I was just kind of doing my work and experimenting. And last fall at the conference in San Francisco, I sort of had this expectation that everybody was going to do the work like the way I've been doing it. Then actually come to find out that I couldn't really find a resonance to what I was doing. And so right afterwards, I was thinking I really need to write about this and then see what resonance I will get from the article. So over the last 3 years, I've been thinking about two main issues, and one has to do with what we call either the knowing field or the morphic field. And my question was really around, is there really such a thing? And if there is such a thing, can we test it? Is it real? Can we really rely on this field? So my question around facilitation had to do with who actually knows what needs to be set up. Because if you think about when we work with a client, the client is usually stuck or entangled in their situation. Do we really know, do we really trust them that they could tell us what needs to be set up in order to find a solution? And then, I was also thinking about it myself, if there's a certain issue that comes up that I might have not resolved for myself, something that comes from my own family system, how would I know what to set up? Wouldn't I be entangled as well and then maybe set something up that might be useful for myself but maybe not for the client? So I've been really thinking about, those two issues. Very often when we actually set up an issue with a client, then we also probably have noticed that after a very few moments, the field starts to shift and other sides starting to show up, or maybe people are standing up and say, I feel like I need to represent X, Y, and sometimes there are parts that have not even really been part of the client's conversation or the client's storyline. So how do we actually really know what needs to be set up? What will actually bring a resolution? And often, after we have set up a field, sometimes it totally shifts, and then we have a total new scenario actually in front of us. that was very different from where we actually started. So I've been thinking about these unexpected elements that keep showing up and wondering, is there a way to actually give space to that so that we can actually have, maybe from the very beginning, we create a field where all these unexpected elements can actually already be present or actually can get a voice. So I've been playing more and more with this idea, does it really actually need a facilitator? Do we really need to set up or follow the storyline of the client? So over the last 3 years, I've been really kind of more and more moving away from actual facilitation, or even like trying to set something up that really relates to the storyline of the client, and actually relying on the field that is being created. So what has actually showed up over the last 2-3 years has come to a place where I have a client, and this now I'm talking about a group scenario. The client will tell a story, and then I will actually ask the participants if they can just check in with themselves of what is actually alive in them. And almost like kind of encouraging them not to think about the storyline anymore, and just to pay attention to what is alive actually in them and what wants to be represented. And interesting enough, what has shown up has been that very sort of bizarre or abstract or elements that actually showing up that actually don't seem to relate to the storyline. And when I first encountered that, I was a little skeptical and a little nervous about, okay, what is going to happen? And then I explained to the group that this will be an experiment, and if this doesn't go in the right direction, I will stop it and just start over or see what actually wants to happen. And interesting enough, what actually has occurred is that these sort of abstract elements seem to connect. I mean, I'm going to give you one scenario. I had a client sometime last fall that had a birth trauma. And, usually the storyline has to do with, there's a doctor there, and there's a nurse, and then there's the mother and this child, and, then there's the trauma, and, we probably would set something around that. So interesting enough, there was a mid-sized group there, maybe about 10 people. So 2 people stood up, and one person said, I want to represent the pain, and the other person who stood up said, I want to represent the gift. And that was it. There was nobody else stood up, nothing else wanted to be shown. And then these 2 actually started sort of a dance with each other and sort of a communication. But again, it was very abstract, and it didn't really reveal anything very specific. But the pain and the gift were interacting with each other. And at some point, I decided to bring the client into this constellation. And then actually the gift and the pain started to dance with the client. And pretty soon, I kind of checked in with the client, and I said, does this make sense to you? Is this? And he said, yes, it makes total sense. I never acknowledged the gift. I never thanked the gift. And so this went on for another maybe 5-10 minutes, and then the client started really kind of stretching and moving in different directions. And you could almost see sort of like a physical transformation happening. Later on, I found out that this man had done many constellations around this issue, and he was now sort of in his mid-late 30s, and he had never gotten to this kind of place. And some real transformation seemed to have happened. And so this is really what I've been encountering over the last 3 years by doing this kind of work, that it seems to go to a much deeper place and much faster by just trusting what is actually in the entire field of everybody who shows up, that we are actually have the capacity to tap into something that is actually beyond the storyline. It goes actually much deeper to something that I, as a facilitator, could never even imagine of setting up, that I wouldn't even know where to go or what to ask for. So I think I'm just going to stop it here right now and just, want to see what questions might come up so far, or what questions you might have.
So, Elmar, this is Ellen. Yes, so in the example that you just gave, you did have the client tell his story, and he did point to birth trauma, and then the group took in, or we started with nothing?
I couldn't hear. What was the last part? He talked about the birth trauma, and then what?
I said started with nothing. I just wanted to know what the group had heard, if they picked up, something, because earlier you said you had them ignore the client's story, but I wondered if they knew they were working with birth trauma.
They knew that. Yeah, they knew that.
Okay.
I mean, I had them listen. I usually have them listen to the story, but then, before we start the constellation, I encourage them to just check in with their body. Just check in what is alive in them. And sort of like encouraging them at that point to kind of forget what they just heard, but just to pay attention to what's alive in their body, in their own being, in their own system.
I have a question.
Yes.
Go ahead.
What do you mean by alive? What kind of answers do you get? Alive meaning some parts in the body, or alive in their relationships? What kind of answers do you usually get from the clients when they?
Well, I'm not actually looking for answers. I just ask them whatever is alive in them, and what I mean by that is if there's something triggered, if they get certain sensations, if they get certain feelings, and if they can give a label to that. And I say it can be a word, or it can be even a whole phrase, but if they can find a label for the experience that they are having sitting there in the circle. And then I ask them if they can ask their higher self, and whatever that is for them, to get permission to represent this at this time. And if they're ready to do so, then stand up and announce what they want to represent. And then usually when we have about 4 or 5 people stand up, then I ask them just to hold whatever they're holding at this point, and then I start facilitating what's in the room. And then sometimes other people stand up later on, and then they announce something else, and then they start being part of the scene.
So does everyone who represents, do they explain, do they say something about what they're representing, Elmar?
Most of them do. Sometimes also people get up and say, I feel really strongly about something, and I can't name it yet.
Okay.
And then they say, okay, then just stand up and just be with that. And then as soon as you know what it might be, then maybe announce what it might be. And then sometimes people start representing and they say, it feels to me like I'm a grandmother or something. Then they start getting a sense of what it actually is.
I know you're experimenting with this, and the example you gave, someone had a lot of constellations done, and so that deep work might possibly be thought of as coming, after a lot of, quote, shallower work, unquote. Have you seen this in action with people who are doing like a first constellation, or
oh, yeah.
Yeah, you understand what I'm asking about,
yes.
Right?
Yes, yeah, totally. I would say that I probably have more people who are newcomers to the work, because I do a monthly group, and every month there's new people coming to this work. And so I do this with people who are newcomers or people who have done constellations. It's like a total mix.
Yeah, okay.
And it's the same kind of response.
I have a question. When these people kind of tune into these feelings they have, are you able to tune in with them and kind of facilitate control what is happening during the constellation? Or you just give them this freedom to do whatever they feel?
I probably have sort of like something in between that I always, when I facilitate, I always observe the client. and always make sure that the client is okay and that the client can actually follow what's going on. But then I give the representatives some space so that they can actually move about and they can say what they need to say. Because I also found that sometimes it's good just to have kind of a free flow and just notice what the energy actually wants to do by itself. And sometimes I notice that the client might need to hear something very specific. And then I always check with the representatives if they could say something like that. Like if there is a role reversal or something, and maybe like a child is too big bigger than the parents or something, then I kind of check in and say, can you say, you are my father and I'm your son, or something like that. That's very traditional of what we know from constellation work.
So it sounds like in some cases, and correct me if I'm wrong, you are kind of trying to shift things towards some sort of resolution, or are you just kind of leaving things entirely alone, or do dynamics emerge and then you work with those? I'm not clear about that.
All of the above.
All of the above.
It's just sometimes at the end, or when something like in terms of energy, when it seems like the energy has shifted and something is at a place where it seems to be finished, but the client is still a little puzzled because it was kind of abstract, then I kind of see if we can bring this into some terminology that might be understandable for the client. That makes sense.
Yes.
Because, we know, too, is that, this work is very energetic, but often people need to have sort of a mental resolution as well, that on a mental level they can understand it, what just happened here on an emotional and physical level.
And also I wondered if you ever stopped a constellation when you feel it's not going the direction that you would beneficial for the clients or something like that.
I've never experienced that, actually. The only time I stop constellations when I feel that there's too much information coming for the client, and I feel like the client is not totally ready yet, especially like when it has to do with secrets. When suddenly, like, let's say some trauma shows up or some really dark places that the client is not quite ready yet to see that. Then sometimes I say, this might be a good place to stop and just, bring this to a conclusion. But interesting enough, I mean, these constellations are very strange and very bizarre in certain ways. But on the other hand, they have always been beneficial for the client.
Yeah, I was going to just ask you that. Do you have any sense of the aftermath or any, how well is this working in your experience?
Recently I had a client come and she was saying something. She was stuck in her life. Her creativity has really kind of gotten stuck, and she doesn't know quite what's going on. And her creativity has really kind of shriveled up. And then suddenly this constellation went into the direction of death and dying and fear of death. And so it went like in a totally different direction. And so I wasn't quite sure, what really happened. So I sent this woman an email about a week later and said, I'm just checking in, seeing how you're doing, because I know this constellation went totally somewhere else. And she said, well, guess what? The next day I went and I did some really creative work.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I was thinking about the little that I know about what facilitators are thinking as they set up, your original question. And I've been told that it had to do, looking for things that had been excluded or during the facilitation, things that may need to enter and be around give take or the sort of the social order, like the parent-child thing that you brought up of being big or small. And I'm wondering if at the end of these experiments, now standing where you are, if the issues or the principles or the order of things that you're witnessing are lined up with what we know around, the orders of love, or do you think there's more to it? Because you made it sound like maybe there's these are deeper somehow than those, or do you find at the end it's just consistent and all you're really doing is giving it a head start by taking in the wisdom of the group to start? Does that make sense?
So, I have to say I only understood half of what you said because there's a lot of reverberation in the translation here. But I'm going to try to answer as best as I can. So I really, over the last few years, I really stepped away from, the traditional way of looking at things. I mean, I want to say pretty much actually the work itself has actually moved in a very different direction. All I'm actually really looking at is what is actually in this field that wants to be looked at versus what is it that I as a facilitator want to look at, or what does the client wants to look at, but more actually what shows up in this field. And the field meaning everybody who is present, who has now gotten a glimpse of a story. And, the question that goes to my mind is, is this field actually alive? Is it actually alive before we even start a constellation? Is it already there? And are we just stepping into what is already there? And the sense that I'm getting that this is really what is actually is taking place. We are just stepping in something that's already happening. I found, really just setting up the story and what we hear or what I think might be a good solution or who should be there, that kind of gets in the way. It just takes much longer for that to actually to move out of the way so that the aspects who really want to be seen can actually show up. And in my opinion, the way I've been doing this work is now that what really wants to show up is showing up from the very beginning. Did that answer your question?
I'm sorry. It was part of my question because I didn't know how to formulate it. Probably, have you noticed like a new patterns in familiar to us orders of love, some new development, what could be formulated as orders of love, but something deep?
Wow, that is a pretty amazing question. Thank you for asking it. Right now, I'm more at the place right now where I'm just still totally surprised and at awe. Every time I do a constellation, I'm just totally at awe of what shows up. And then, I'm actually sort of like in shock. Can I actually really work with this? Is this really in service to the client, what's showing up here right now? Or is this like totally crazy? Am I crazy to do this? And, can I really trust this? And then when I trust it, it's just amazing what's happening. I mean, I'm so just at awe.
That's exactly what I feel, because I found there are a lot of free interpretations of how this field works. And I'm trying to even to different directions. I noticed that if I name, I work a lot with individuals, and we name whatever it is. We name a representative for such and such issue, and it exactly gives us the essence of what, of this, it has so much of potential, I would say, when we just tap into it.
Yes. Thank you very much for actually pointing this out, because I started now in my individual sessions, when I do phone sessions, I talk to a client for a while and, they tell me the whole story of what's going on. So what I just kind of keep taking notes of what they're talking to me about, and in a very sort of abstract way. And then when we start the work, I just kind of say, let's just kind of follow the energy of what wants to be set up. And it has really nothing to do with a specific order or a specific arrangement or what came first or second. It's just kind of sort of an abstract pattern. And we just kind of set all of this up. And sometimes it's maybe 15 things, and we set all of them up at the same time. And then we just start noticing what are the relationships of these 15 things. And what is actually the pattern that starts coming out of that. And then sometimes the client says, oh, this is interesting. Now I'm just thinking about my grandma, and I haven't thought about her for 10 years. And they say, well, do you think she needs to be in here? Well, maybe. And then we just put her in. And then we just see what wants to happen next. So it's much more of a free flow of just energies that's showing up.
Elmar, here's a question. This is a place you've gotten to and started experimenting with after a lot of experience. Do you think this is a place that, like brand new people could start out working from, or would they perhaps need to work in a more traditional way for a while to acquire certain sorts of sensitivities? Are you starting to teach this to people? I'm curious about those aspects.
Very good question. Thank you. Last year I had a training group, and I had already discovered this work, but I didn't introduce it to the group until very late on, because I'm not quite sure if we can really just start at this place. Because when something will fall apart, for me as a facilitator, it's kind of good to know, good to understand, that there is actually a structure. There is an order. And I always sense, even in chaos, I always sense an order in that. And I'm not sure, if somebody who has very little experience or no experience, if they would have that sensitivity.
Yeah, some of what, I don't like the word orders of love. I sort of think of strategies of love myself, but those maybe are kind of like training wheels in a sense, to keep the bicycle upright for a while until one learns to balance without them, so to speak.
Right. But then it just reminded me, think about, when I first started doing this work, I would spend half an hour introducing this work to people and, kind of train them or teach them how to represent and what to look for and how to feel and how to think. And today, I say about 3 minutes, I tell them, you can represent. And then, we start doing it. There isn't really much training anymore. And I think, even in the last 10 years, I think people have, we as a species, we have really evolved. And we can really do this work. And I feel like we can do it much faster. So maybe this is possible, but I'm not sure yet.
Yeah. Do you see what you're doing as somehow different from like Hellinger's, movements of the soul or movements of the spirit mind?
When he used to do movements of the soul, there was almost like no talking. People would just move around.
Yeah.
And I saw some of that work, and I could not relate to it. To me, I was just sitting there, and I was like pantomime or something, and I had no clue of what actually happened. And I feel like in the way I do it, I never actually stopped conversations with my clients or in facilitation, because I felt like, we are a cognitive species, and most of us want to understand cognitively what is actually going on, what happened, at least to some extent. I like to have conversation and verbal interaction so that people see what is happening on a physical level, on an emotional level, on an intellectual level, spiritual, on all of them. They can actually experience that all at the same time. So I'm not quite sure if I answered the question, but I feel like I'm starting at a different place than what I have seen around me.
Yeah. So some of you who haven't been in the conversation, you want to jump in? Please feel free.
I want to ask, how about this statement that we cannot speak to the client at all about what happened in the constellation, because it brings the work from the soul level to the mental level? Because with my clients, I found it very naturally, that because it comes like a light bulb for myself, and I'm kind of discovering it for myself, and I'm having to talk about it, what happened in my understanding to a client, because I'm pretty sure that's what happened, because sometimes they cannot understand. And then I stop myself just telling them, you know what, you should just stay with the picture, just like we were taught. And somehow inside of me, I feel that it is wrong, that I'm stopping myself, and they still like in state of not understanding. But I'm just wondering what you think about that.
To me, it's more I'm checking in with the client and noticing what, if that makes sense to them or not. And it's a very general question. I'm just asking, did this make sense to you? And if they nod their heads, then I just leave it at that. Sometimes they might have a question. And sometimes I also say, if there's something specifically you really need to know from one of the representatives, you can ask them. Or sometimes I say something to the representatives, if there's something that you experience and it would be really useful for the client to hear, this might be a time. But if you don't think it's really not useful, then let's not go there. So I'm more on the side of not having conversations, just to have the client have the experience. But some clients, they're very cognitive. They're really much in their head, and they feel like they need to know more. But I never want to go to a place where we start dissecting the constellation or where we start explaining it. I never want to really explain a constellation. I think it really needs to be felt. I think the shift needs to happen kind of on a physical level. Yeah. And then maybe secondary would be a mental level, but not mental first.
Thank you.
So, Jan, I see you got your hand up. You want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think it's a great, I'm really enjoying the conversation. Elmar, I really appreciate where you've taken this, and I'd just like to reflect on it a little bit from my perspective. One thing is just about, the question you started with is whether there is such a thing as a field, whether that even exists. I think you've answered the question. I believe from what you're, my understanding of what you're saying is that yes, there is such a thing as a field. It seems like that's what you're working in and tapping into, and that's also my sense. Very much so, is that I have a very strong confidence that there is a field, and it's not only the field in constellations. There's this field that we all exist in, and constellations basically just by or primarily by having us be quiet and be still. Is the two tools that it takes to perceive the field, and then once we are able to do that and have this process form, we start working with it. The other point that I would make is I feel that the constellation form is really in its very early stages of being understood and developed. Where even those of us who have a lot of experience are, in a lot of ways, we're kind of feeling our way in the dark in terms of what really goes on in a constellation. It seems like there is a long human history, thousands and thousands of years of human history in multiple cultures all around the world where these phenomena were known and worked with, and there was a lot of mastery in cultures and different civilizations and traditions. And to the Europeans and the Americans, a lot of that has really been lost over the past centuries, and that the world that we've grown up with is basically, we're almost back to square one of just asking, does a field exist? And it's still very much culturally a live question. And so we don't have the traditions or the upbringing to work with fields, the family fields, and fields of human intelligence, and so that we're just feeling our way. And that creates a tension between trainers, students of Constellations, and facilitators. That trainers necessarily have to put what they know into a curriculum, which is basically this is how you do it, a certain set of principles and instructions that are necessary for trainers to teach facilitators how to facilitate. But then once facilitators start to facilitate and get some experience, I think to be successful and to really grow, facilitators have to be willing to really discard a lot of what they've been trained and start finding their own way to be beneficial to clients and to change the form and to not do things the way that they've been taught, but do things according to what their own discoveries are of what works with them and through them and for the people that come to their groups. And that's my sense of what you're doing. And it's very exciting. I actually do some of what you're describing. Already I'm using it, but I will, just taking from what you said, I'm going to experiment with some of there's some things that you mentioned that I don't do, and I'm going to start experimenting with them. And I just really appreciate your sharing your learning with us, and I think it's really valuable.
Thank you, Dan. What did you say? Copying is the greatest form of flattery. So thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's see, Wendy Lund. Hi. Jump in.
I really appreciate your sharing this with us. Along with Dan, I want to experiment with this, and I feel your humility and trust of a greater power in this process that I really appreciate. And thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
And I want to say thank you because I already started to experiment. I don't feel the need to discard actually anything I was taught, because I think it is a great foundation. But I also feel that a field it's opening such a potential to us. It is maybe it started opening now because we are in the time of the shift, and I think it has the just endless potential, but it can give you the answer to any question you ask actually when you tune in. But it was great conversation. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. I think what you said is really correct. There's really nothing to disregard or to discharge. I think whatever we have learned, we really had to learn that. I mean, we really had to start at some place, and I think where we started, with maybe very strict facilitation of, you can say this and don't say that, and you have to stand this way, and I think I personally had to go through that, and I think it gave me security. It gave me a sense of, being grounded. Mm-hmm. But then just at some point, I noticed facilitation that I couldn't agree with. It seemed too strict to me, too restricting, and too much focus towards a specific outcome. And, I really wanted to experiment with something that was much looser and really would acknowledge that there is a field, there is something that is maybe bigger than we are, bigger definitely than myself, and something that can be of service to us.
I have a question regarding what you mentioned about the phone constellation, that you're placing representatives. And are you able to see your client? Is it a Skype phone or is it just a land that you're talking to that person?
No, I haven't done any. I haven't done any Skype sessions yet, and Maybe I'll have a conversation with Dan at some point. I think he does them with Skype. But I just do them over the phone. And then what I do is I use mats on the floor, and then I actually encourage the client to use small pieces of paper, and they set up in front of themselves. They set up a small constellation with small pieces of paper. And then I duplicate what they have on the table on the floor. And then I step into all the different places and report from there. And then we start moving things around. And as I move things around, the client moves things around. So we're always kind of in sync. And then actually the client has something that they can keep at the end, sort of an arrangement that works for them.
So is it cumbersome to communicate with each other? Say grandma is facing 45-degree angle toward the sun, or things like that, or...
No, it's exactly like that. They would say they're facing 45 degrees, and then I moved them 45 degrees.
And how about distance? Do you talk about distance too?
Yeah. I said, how far is it? Is it close? Is it far? I'm sure what I set up might not be exactly the same with what they do, but I think energetically it's very close. So it's close enough.
I see. Okay. How long does a session like this usually last?
All my sessions are usually an hour and a half.
Okay. We're coming near the end. Anybody have a last comment or question?
Just thanks, first of all, of the whole idea of such discussion. It is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Too.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Elmar.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
First of all, thank you, Elmar. That was really a wonderful conversation, and it sounds like a wonderful form of experimentation that's going on, and I hope we continue to hear about it as it continues to develop. So thank you.
And if I can also say that if you experiment with this, and if you have questions or you find something really interesting out, I would really appreciate if you want to contact me. I have a website. It's hemisphereconsulting.com. So it's one word, hemisphereconsulting.com. And I'm going to put the article that I've written in the knowing field will be on my website. So if you haven't read the article yet, maybe by next week, maybe you can read it on my website.
Once again, thank you, Elmar.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Good night, everybody. Have a really great week.